Welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this afternoon. If you go on to the next slide, James. Just to declare we've got no conflicts of interest in relation to this presentation. On the next slide, James. So as Dario introduced us, we're talking about integrating qualitative evidence syntheses with intervention effect syntheses, and this is the last of a series of 8 webinars. So all of the previous webinars have been about how to synthesize qualitative research. So this bit is about how we get our qualitative evidence syntheses to speak to intervention effect reviews, and we'll be introducing some approaches, some methods and tools to help you do that, and signpost lots of resources on the way. If you go on to the next slide, James. So first of all, James is going to just take a step back and talk about the issues involved in terms of the bigger picture. Why are we even attempting to integrate these 2 different types of syntheses? What's the purpose? What does it achieve? And then I'll go on to give you an overview of possible designs, methods and tools. I'll talk you through some examples and also talk a little bit about the differences between the different approaches and how we might assess the robustness of our efforts to integrate. And then we'll open up to questions for the last 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to hand over to James now to introduce the big picture.
Great. Thanks, Angela. I hope my my mic's working. Yep, great. Okay, so I'm going to spend just a few minutes just orientating us in terms of why we should be thinking about integrating different types of evidence within an evidence synthesis. You know, what kinds of problems does this solve? I should first acknowledge that some of this work draws on work from many people. It certainly isn't just mine or Angela's. The MRC Methodology Project, MAC, and many papers and thinking from lots of other people too. So there's lots and lots of further reading for people if you want to get into this subject. I think one of the first things to consider and put on the table is our take and our orientation towards what I've called epistemic security. And the challenge that we've got is that we are trying to inform decision making in the real world using research evidence and using robust and reliable research evidence and reliable evidence synthesis. But it's fair to say that we're more secure with some accounts than others. And I won't go into big detail here, but I'll just sort of flag. There's a whole interesting literature on epistemic security and causality and causal thinking, different types of counterfactual and probabilistic accounts of causality, contrasting often with regularity and mechanistic accounts. So different types of evidence might have informed different types of accounts which relate to causality. And also one important consideration here is around epistemic justice and injustice in terms of whose perspectives are getting a seat at that table in terms of evidence. Are we prioritizing specific perspectives in the way in which we're identifying the types of evidence that we choose to synthesize? You know, these are not value neutral decisions that we're making. If we make one particular decision on a particular type of evidence that we're looking at, what it might mean, as well as what we think are all sorts of good reasons for selecting that type of evidence, that we're actually also selecting a particular perspective and thereby diminishing the importance or the relative importance of other perspectives in informing particular decisions. Fundamentally, of course, we start evidence synthesis or any research project, we're thinking about the question. In often Cochrane reviews, what we're thinking about are interventions. Is intervention A better than intervention B? Or an extension to that, which intervention should I choose for treating this particular condition? So we're familiar with those types of questions. So Cochrane has got a number of different ways of addressing them. In conventional ways, we often think about pairwise meta-analyses, simply comparing one intervention effect with another. And obviously, we've also then got network meta-analysis, which is increasingly recognized as answering decision-relevant questions, because it answers actually the what works question. We're thinking about a range of different treatment effects, which one should we be thinking about? And both of these can provide what we think about traditionally as strong causal claims. So we often use randomized trials, and we can be fairly clear that when we're using randomized trials, that the evidence or the evidence of effect or no evidence of effect that we're observing is due to the intervention rather than other factors. So the questions we're looking at here are around the effect itself. How large is the effect and how consistent is that effect? We assume that we know what the intervention is and that the population and the other parameters are relatively consistent across the evidence base. So I'm going to draw on various COVID-19 experiences here and thinking about face coverings. A simple mechanistic causal question here. Can they prevent the virus from entering or leaving the mouth and the nose? And there are studies which look at that particular question. Is this barrier able to prevent virus particles from moving in either direction? So we could have a simple question around, do masks work? And we could answer it in a fairly simple way here, thinking about simply the movement of viral particles. However, that's not usually the situation that we're thinking about implementing, certainly public health interventions here. We've got to think about actually, it's not just about whether or not the barrier itself is effective, because often the barrier itself isn't the intervention. The intervention in this case could be a picture on a UCL wall there. And you can see there that we've got a multi-component intervention straight away. We've got face coverings that should be worn at all times. We've also got the social distancing, the keeping your distance stuff too. So we don't actually have a simple question. We've got a multi-component intervention here, and actually the question then isn't about whether masks work, but actually whether a particular way of exhorting people to start wearing masks is effective. And so we've got a longer causal pathway between the intervention and any health effects that it might or might not have. Expanding even more from that, we can think about the socio-political dimension of the introduction of an intervention like this. Even simple interventions, if you're introducing them to a complex social environment, you can generate complicated, complex, unintended consequences. So we ended up with the whole politics around a relatively simple public health intervention, which was supposed to be a sort of a standard barrier to prevent viral particles moving, into a whole political dimension where essentially your orientation towards politics and many other things was being represented by whether or not you chose to wear a face covering. And so there, again, we've got a simple, what apparently is a simple intervention, but its use and whether or not, the question about whether or not it works or not is much more complicated than about viral particles moving, because it's about the social and the political context within which it's introduced. So we've all heard about these phrases about complex interventions or intervention complexity, where we can have lots of different types of effect. We have nonlinear effects, we have phase changes and feedback loops. So we're not going to go into a big debate on causality and complexity today, but it's important to bear in mind that the environment within which we're trying to improve people's health is a complicated and it's a complex one. And we often need to draw on multiple different pieces of evidence in order to address real world questions. So I'll just skip that one because I don't want to delay us too much. But I think it's probably worth bearing in mind that this, like, the focus of our inquiry can often change when we start looking at the implementation of even simple interventions, rather than thinking, oh, can we prevent these particles moving in my example there, we start to think, well, actually, we've not got any single effect here because we actually don't have a single intervention. We've got an exhortation to wear masks in different situations. And a lot of the questions that decision makers are asking focus on explanation and understanding. When should we do a particular when should we take a particular approach to intervention? Why was it observed? Why was an effect observed in one situation and why not in another? And what drives these differences in outcomes between different studies?